Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here for another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are playing as the Tomb Kings against the Brettonians on the map the Glooming Wood. So on this map everything is very much intersected by the obviously the woods, and so it did actually take a little while for me to figure out where my opponent was. As you can see, my army deployed over here in the open, and my opponent decided to hide his whole army in the woods, being very sneaky and very unchivalrous as it would seem. So in this situation, of course, the Tomb Kings have just come out, so I'm not entirely sure what's good for comps, but I did figure that I didn't want Lore of Death against the Brettonians, just to knock down some of their better units, like for example Grail Knights or Grail Guardians. If I need to melt them down a little bit, then I figured Fate of Buna would be very nice in that situation. So I did bring, as you can see over here, the Fate of Buna, as well as Spirit Leech on Arc in the Black. And I didn't want to pay for an additional caster. I wanted to have a Necrotect as well as a Tomb Prince, so definitely Arc in the Black was the way to go. He's not a great melee combatant. As you can see, 40 melee attack, 50 melee defense, weapon strength 450. Not a great charge bonus at all. 76 speed on his horse here. But Arc in the Black is somewhat survivable. He has almost 4,000 HP, 90 armor, and of course he does give you Lore of Death without needing to bring a caster for that. He also does have some pretty cool abilities. He does have built-in physical resistance due to the fact that, well, it's not built-in, but he has a physical resistance right now because the Tomb Prince is next to him. But more importantly, he does, of course, have Lore of Death. He does have some cool abilities like the Tomb Blade of Arkan, which allows him to replenish nearby allies' HPs, as well as heal, as well as healing in the injured troops, as well as just resurrected troops as well. So it's kind of like an Invocation of Nehek in that sense. Definitely pretty solid upgrade here for him. He also does have the Staff of Nagash, which is improved power recharge rate and minus 30 ability recharge, which is great as well, just because it lets you spam spells a little more and gives you additional winds of magic, because he doesn't have Arcane Conduit. He does have the Liber Mortis, which is a 44% physical resistance AoE. It's actually very powerful, especially once units are bogged down in combat. Of course, just like all the other Tomb Kings, he does have the My Will Be Done, which is plus 5 melee defense and plus 5 melee attack for all nearby units, so it actually does not affect him. It only affects nearby allies. And then, of course, he does have this Curse, which, when he's dropped below a certain amount of HP, below 50%, it causes sort of Fate of Buna effect around him. As mentioned before, I did bring a Tomb Prince as well, Necrotect. You can see the Tomb Prince I brought largely for the bodyguard role to defend, but also for the fact that he does have anti-large armor piercing. You can see not the best melee stats by any means, 70 armor, bronze shield, so nothing great there, but he does have armor piercing with a bonus versus large of 25, so definitely very solid there. He does have that Guardian ability. Curse of Jaff, which once or if he drops below 50% HP, it causes all nearby troops to rampage and suffer a minus 26 melee attack penalty. He also does have Tomb Strike, which allows him to boost his own melee attack, weapon damage, and allows him to cause tear, which can be very useful if I don't have a tear-causing unit nearby. And finally, he does have the Blade of Setep, which is on a 90-second cooldown and minus 30 armor, minus 22% physical resistance debuff, which can be very potent, especially given the fact that a lot of Brettonian knights do have that physical resist from Blessing of the Lady. This could definitely kind of undo that and then also nerf that armor a little bit. We do also have a Necrotect, who is, of course, going to be there for buffing my constructs. I didn't bring too many of them, but I did bring a small handful, and they are really my main damaging component in this army. He does have the Van Braces of the Sun, which are an AoE minus 9 melee attack debuff, which can be very useful if my opponent's troops start kind of to break up, for example, Battle Pilgrims or Men-at-Arms and all those sorts of units, which would otherwise smush my skeleton front line with kind of contemptuous ease. I do have the Wrath of the Creator, which can buff my nearby constructs with plus 5 melee attack and plus 5% armor piercing damage, which isn't terrible, especially if plus 5 melee attack is pretty useful, though obviously I'm not bringing you Shopti here. I do have Restore, which allows me to replenish HP on a construct, though it does not replace dead constructs. And then Elixir of Might, which can be applied to an ally, gives him plus 50% weapon damage and plus 26 melee attack. A bit of an iffy choice, but I wanted to give it a try. My front line here is very kind of small. I do have 2 units of Skeleton Spears, one of which is the King Nikesh's Scorpion Legion, which are Skeleton Spears, which have really high stats. They're 9 veterancy, they have a little more armor at 45, and then they do cause poison damage, which can be very useful just for debuffing troops. Here in the center we have some veteran up skeleton warriors. Their stats are still terrible, but with the backing of the Necrotect, hopefully they can hold up a Brettonian formation. 2 units of Necron warriors who I'm really hoping can trade in an okay manner with, say, Battle Pilgrims and tear through Men-at-Arms and those sorts of units. None of these units can really fight against Foot Squires, so if my opponent decides to bring those, they will probably slice and dice their way through my front line very effectively. This is definitely a bit of a cheap front line, definitely not the greatest front line, but that's not really where I'm trying to invest the most heavily. And really the main investment is in my heroes as well as in these large supporting constructs. I do have a single unit of Necropolis Knights here with halberds. These guys, of course, are a rather small unit. They only have 18 models rather than the 24 you'll find on Demigryphs, for example. So they're a little weak. They're a little weaker than that sense, but they do apply poison. They do have decent melee attack and melee defense, backed up by a huge bonus versus large of 28, an okay armor amount of 90, which is actually useful against Brettonia, which doesn't have much armor piercing. Hit points are great, over 5,000, and a charge bonus, which is not impressive, but 40 is still better than nothing. We also do have a Necrosphinx over here, of course, a powerhouse anti-large unit. You can see I'm definitely investing very heavily into anti-large because, of course, my front line will not really be able to hold or deal with cavalry if it decides to plow through. So definitely need to invest here into large just to disrupt and backline or backdoor my opponent's troops and that sort of stuff. You can see I do have this Necrosphinx here with that 110 armor, 550 damage. Bonus versus large of 35, which stacks on top of that melee attack of 42, which is really solid. 50 melee defense. Basically, this is a unit that's very comparable to Dragon Ogre Shaggoth, though definitely a bit tankier. In exchange for some, I do believe, slightly worse melee attack and defense stats. Finally, way out here on the flank, we do have the Eyes of the Desert, the Sepulchral Stalkers, Regiment of Renown. The main perk of these guys is that they've stalked, so I'm hoping to kind of bait my opponent in with what seems to be a slightly weaker kind of cavalry force, hopefully kind of bait him into my hero or lord, and then jump him with the Eyes of the Desert and use these guys to flank them and destroy them from the side. The Eyes of the Desert themselves, outside of the fact that they do have stalk, don't really have much going for them. I do believe Vanguard deployment is built into all Sepulchral Stalkers to begin with from my Lita campaign. I do believe that's the case. They're fairly mobile at 50, though definitely not comparable to cavalry. Melee attack is not great, but they do have bonus versus large of 21, which is actually really, really solid. So they can definitely lay the smackdown on some Brettonian knights. I do apologize for that lengthy intro to the Tomb Kings, but I really want to go over my composition here, kind of why I brought it, just to trying to lock down the enemy front line, and then really sort of shut down the Brettonian heavy cavalry with my own sort of heavy force here. So I definitely apologize for how long that was, but hopping over to the Brettonians, this should be a pretty quick rundown. My opponent decided to go with an interesting choice for Lord. He did bring Albrecht the Bordelot. We don't see him too often, but he's not a bad Lord by any means. It's simply that Lune's very, very popular. Albrecht does have pretty good armor here at 110. He does have 430 weapon strength, which is not armor piercing, but he does have a bonus versus large of 30, melee attack 57, melee defense 40. So definitely very solid there. Great charge bonus at 92, though obviously that is being buffed by one of his abilities here, the Spirit of the Tempest, which boosts his nearby cavalry as well as or nearby allies, but usually it's used to support his cavalry troops. He does have, of course, Foe Seeker, Rally, which is a weaker, basically just a leadership buff. Heroic Killing Blow to boost his own damage, and then the Wrath of Manon, which I'm not entirely sure is worthwhile. It does cause a discouraged effect, but that's not that useful against undead, who obviously don't break. Nonetheless, definitely pretty solid Lord, and alongside him he does have somewhere in here a Damsel of Life, and the Damsel of Life coming in with Earthblood as well as Regrowth and a Power Stone. So definitely this could help counteract my Fate of Punas. It could definitely help hold the front line hold much better, or help the cavalry once they start brawling with my own sort of monster / cavalry heavy force. This front line is a pretty solid combination of battle pilgrims mixed in with some spearmen at arms with shields. The battle pilgrims should be able to shred through my skeletons pretty effectively, though obviously with that debuff coming in from the Necrotect, it might not be as easy as one would think. These guys are also backed by Peasant Bows, but the Peasant Bowmen, in my opinion, are not going to perform that well against the Skeleton Warriors, simply because the Skeleton Warriors do have silver shields. It's one of the few good things about the low tier on Tomb King infantry is that they do have silver shields, and of course, with lacking armor piercing, the Peasant Bowmen won't do great against my constructs, and once again, because they'll be stuck firing at the front, they'll be a struggle against the shields of the Tomb King infantry. For his backline, my opponent does have some pretty potent anti-large support with 2 units of men-at-arms with polearms. Of course, with the Grail Relic, these guys should definitely stick around through thick and thin, and the men-at-arms with polearms can definitely lay the smackdown on my Necropolis Knights or my Necrosphinx, or of course Archon the Black if he gets stuck in with them, the Eyes of the Desert. All these units could easily get torn down by the polearms rather effectively. And that's not even counting my opponent's cavalry, which is very anti-large focused. Obviously, both of us were definitely a bit fearful of what monstrous and large troops our opponent could bring. And so you can see my opponent did bring 2 units of Grail Knights as well as the Knights of the Realm here. And that is definitely going to give him a very solid anti-large lineup. I do apologize once again for how lengthy that intro was. I really wanted to catch everything and kind of explain everything. As the Tomb Kings become established, I should definitely be a little more bit faster. Here you can see the Grail Knights are getting stripped away, losing a lot of HP here to the Fate of Buna. My opponent is going to counteract that, or try to counteract that, with a bit of a healing cast there. You can see a regrowth does go down after they've lost about half their HP. If we look at a unit of Grail Knights, if we can find one, those are Knights of the Realm actually. I sally out, try to engage them, but I'm not really able to pursue. But if we look at this other unit of Grail Knights, over 5,000 compared to these Grail Knights. These Grail Knights got stripped down to about 50% HP before the regrowth kicks in. And you can see the regrowth will heal them up, but nowhere near enough to compensate for how much damage that Fate of Buna did. It'll definitely wear off before they've healed too much. You can see some arrow fire is coming in against my Necrosphinx and my Necropolis Knights, but it's really not going to do very much. They do have passable armor at 90, and the Peasant Bowmen are not accurate at all. Here you can see I'm trying to be a little clever with my Eyes of the Desert. I don't want them being revealed too soon. I'm trying to use them as a kind of ambush surprise unit. And shortly I'm going to be forced to advance on my opponent simply because I don't have any shooting. My opponent, of course, does have shooting. He does have these Peasant Bowmen, archers, and the archer support is going to be very, very useful from here. And definitely the front lines, I think, are fairly evenly matched. With my debuffs coming in from the Sepulchral, from the Necrotect, as well as all these Nehakaran warriors and these King Nekesh's Scorpion Legion and all these units, I think the front lines are fairly well balanced, especially because my opponent is probably not going to commit his men-at-arms with polearms, since he's most likely going to try to use them to shut down my monstrous troops. You can see the arrow fire not doing very much to those silver shields. Obviously, the Peasant Bowmen are inaccurate to boot, so despite the fact that these guys have only 10 armor in this situation and 45 in this, they're definitely able to survive a bit. You can see here my opponent is getting the jump on Ark in the Black. I don't get to run away with him in time. Definitely a big mistake on my part, but you can see I do countercharge here with my Noble. And now the Necrosphinx, as well as Necropolis Knights, are charging in. They are going to be able to apply that poison, which is going to be able to force these enemy troops to stay in the fight and just kind of drag them into the muck here. Ark in the Black, of course, coming in, hitting good old Alberic with a Blade of Setep to debuff him. And these Grail Knights here did get hit with another Fate of Buna, stripping away their HP. And now they're very much in the gutter as far as their HP is concerned. Over here, I'm still being very cautious with my Eyes of the Desert. You can see we're nowhere near full charge for Realm of Souls. The front line fight is still kind of dragging on. It's barely begun. My opponent has actually decided to commit his polearms, most likely figuring there's no flanking force, and there really isn't. So he does commit this unit of polearms to the fray. Though you can see the Skeleton Warriors, backed by the Necron Warriors, definitely holding their own here. Over here on the flank, you can see these Grail Knights over here have been routed off with the help, of course, of the Sphinx. Unfortunately, my opponent does have these polearms who are causing some serious damage, but I'm able to cast a debuff and start dragging these Knights of the Realm, as well as good old Alberic, into the muck, despite the fact that Earthblood is hitting them and helping him heal a little bit. Necrosphinx will be able to shred these Knights of the Realm with contemptuous ease. In the meantime, you can see that ward save has worn off. You can see my Necropolis Knights, despite being hit by Liber Mortis, are starting to fall apart a little bit. And so I do try to launch a recharge here with the Eyes of the Desert, just trying to bog my opponent down, slow him down, buy myself some time to disengage, and perhaps drag good old Alberic here into the muck. Obviously, with the high armor, the Spearman armors and shields are not too much of a threat, so really my focus here is just trying to strip down Alberic and bring him down to size. And my opponent doesn't have a Grail Relic here, so he's definitely in a little bit of trouble from that perspective. Over here you can see the Skeleton Spearmen with Skeleton Spearmen at arms. The Skeleton Spearmen are starting to get torn up by the Battle Pilgrims, so you can see they're definitely giving almost as good as they're taking in some situations. And and you can see with the help of the Necrotech, they're doing okay. I do commit my Eyes of the Desert here just to tie down the Peasant Bowmen, seeing an opportunity there. And unfortunately, I make a huge mistake here and allow Ark in the Black to get surrounded. Obviously, he doesn't have the best melee stats. He's getting hit by Alberic the Bordello with his bonus against large and getting stripped down with incredible ease. I do manage to get my Necropolis Knights clear, hitting them with the Restore from my Necrotect, and they are now in the fray, just trying to strip away at these Grail Knights. But unfortunately, Arkan is definitely being beaten down, and despite the Spirit Leech against Alberic, he's definitely going to come out the loser in this engagement. I'm definitely worrying that I'm going to lose him at this stage of the game. Over here, the Tomb Prince and Necrosphinx are still tied down. You can see if you cast an Elixir of Might on the Necrosphinx, perhaps a bit wasted against these peasants. Definitely would have been better to save it over here. And I'm still trying to worm my way out with Ark in the Black, get clear, get past my Necropolis Knights and escape. But you can see his leadership is tanking. It's below 0, and he's now going to be starting to crumble, and that is a huge problem, because if I lose my Lord right now, I'm not really in a decisive enough position to start winning. Over here you can see the frontline fight, though, very even. You can see these Battle Pilgrims have won out, but over here the Nehakaran Warriors are definitely holding their own, especially backed with the Skeleton Warriors absorbing some of the damage. Over here, Skeleton Spears, or the King Nekesh's Scorpion Legion, still holding its own against Battle Pilgrims. I do cast another sort of 44% another Liber Mortis here just to survive, even as I run away with Arkan, trying to get him clear of that crumbling, trying to get him behind my own lines, where he'll hopefully stabilize and his leadership will climb back up. In the meantime, over here you can see the Necrosphinx dishing out some major hurt to enemy cavalry, but once again getting zoned away by these men-at-arms with polearms, which are able to strip away its HP pretty effectively. That armor piercing is just very potent. Over here I do manage to plow into these Grail Knights, though. The Grail Knights, of course, don't have armor piercing. They only have 90 armor, so they're going to get torn up by the Necrosphinx pretty effectively. Definitely not the best situation for them. But you can see Necropolis Knights trying to worm their way out, as are the Sepulchral Stalkers. In the backline, my Necrotech is able to start chasing away these Peasant Bows. I do summon my free Shopti now that I've hit the Realm of Souls Tier 3 and Tier 3. Get them into the backline against these Battle Pilgrims. Battle Pilgrims are not going to do well against Shopti at all. You can see those Shopti just raking in the kills, tearing through his backline very quickly. And with the help of these Necron Warriors, they should definitely be able to crush these guys. Over here, the Damsel of Life slugging out with some Skeleton Warriors. Once again, not the greatest situation for her. She's not really meant for that. Over here, I'm simply keeping Archon the Black in a safe spot, trying to rebuild up some Winds of Magic and keep him alive as best as I can without engaging on the Damsel of Life. So Archon the Black, you can see, is on 91 HP, barely stabilized, barely alive, and I'm just trying to keep him alive at all costs, just to keep that leadership up. Over here, the Eyes of the Desert, as well as the Necropolis Knights, have managed to engage and strip down these Grail Knights, as well as Knights of the Realm, and finally wiped out my opponent's troops. You can see the Sepulchral Stalkers actually land a few hits there with their little magical sort of ranged attack. I'm not entirely sure how that works. If we look at it, if we look at the stats, armor piercing missile damage 12, number of projectiles 8, and you can see the game does end. It's rather significant. It's definitely not a bad amount of damage they can do, and it does apply poison. So definitely something to look out for. And you can see that we did get a Pyrrhic victory there. Quickly looking around the battlefield, you can see a whole bunch of units kind of beaten down all around. Albrecht was, I do believe, slain. I do believe, unfortunately, I missed it. Archon barely survived. I'm trying to find him right now, but he was actually ended up being at about 16 HP at the end of the game because he did take a hit, and it was incredibly close and almost lost Archon. So you can see definitely right down to the wire with him. Great game to my opponent Ulfric there. I definitely think this was a pretty cool composition. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to do this sort of comp against the skeletons, the Tomb Kings. That said, I do think Peasant Bowmen are somewhat useless against Tomb Kings because Tomb Kings can usually bring a front line with silver shields, and silver shields will, of course, allow them to tank through the majority of this sort of shooting. As you can see, my infantry actually traded, especially because they were veteran up, they traded somewhat effectively with Battle Pilgrims. Battle Pilgrims aren't the tankiest to begin with, so the Skeleton Warriors, while definitely winning in a one-to-one situation, they won't be that efficient. You can see King Nikesh's Scorpion Legion was doing great, and obviously that debuff from the Necrotech was being a huge boon in the front line. Applying that constant -9 melee attack really meant that the Battle Pilgrims were pretty close in their stats to where my Skeleton Warriors were. Really, though, the main fight was happening out on the flanks, where the Grail Knights were slugging it out, and Alberic, of course, the Grail Knights, the Knights of the Realm, and the Men-at-Arms with Polearms were slugging it out with my blob of Necropolis Knights, Eyes of the Desert, Necrosphinx, Archon, and the Tomb Prince. And definitely, it was a pretty great performance, I would say, from these sort of monstrous units that are just shutting down the enemy cavalry. I definitely think Necropolis Knights are one of the better cavalries in the game. I haven't done full testing on them. I've simply tested them against Demigryphs because I was suspicious that they might be better than Demigryphs with halberds. That was one of the things I was worried about as an Empire player, but they are not. But I definitely think they're one of the better anti-large units with their mix of armor piercing, decent armor of their own, monstrous weapon strength, and poison. I would definitely call them one of the better anti-large units. It's important to keep in mind that they actually have a decent HP pool. They have more HP than, for example, the 45-man unit of Grail Knights, significantly more HP than Demigryph Knights. I do believe over 1,000, about 1,000 more. So they're definitely very, very survivable in that sense. Eyes of the Desert also performed reasonably well. Once again, it's important to keep in mind what units these guys are fighting, mostly cavalry. So 54 for 90, or like 34 kills against what was mostly Grail Knights is really, really pretty impressive. Or Grail Knights and Knights of the Realm. Obviously, some of that was infantry, but still very solid. For my opponent's build, besides my criticism of the use of the Peasant Bowmen, which I think were a bit of a waste, I think this was largely a good build. I'm not entirely sure Spearman Arms were worthwhile. Once again, I think you could have definitely made a better use of the cash spent on the Peasant Bows and the Spearman Arms. Simply because there's just so much. Simply because by and large, so of course the Battle Pilgrims will out-trade the majority of the frontline troops that Tomb Kings can deploy, and the Spearman at Arms simply really can't do very much. The vast majority of the large units that Tomb Kings put on the field, and then the Bowmen can't really do much to them either. And because of the silver shields on all of the lower, actually the vast majority of the infantry that the Tomb Kings field, Peasant Bowmen can't really do much damage to them either. You can see that here they only landed 2 and 5 kills, and then these guys only got 0, which against such poorly armored unit troops is definitely unfortunate. It definitely comes down to those silver shields being ridiculously good at mitigating frontal damage. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent. Definitely very cool to see Albrecht take the field once again. I I do think one of the good ideas perhaps against Tomb Kings might be deploying Flying Lords personally, because having the mass to sneak out of bad situations, as well as having that usually armor piercing that is associated with flyers, and of course having that flexibility and just being able to reposition quickly, and of course Tomb Kings don't really have much to shut down Flying Lords. They don't have any. Their shooting, except for Shop the Great Bows, is not particularly strong, or the anti-air shooting is not particularly strong. They can get snares with net of a Mintock, but once again, because their shooting's not going to be that strong, it's not like they can have a gun line of handguns that will shred you and bring you down immediately. So I definitely think there's some decent potential if players are looking for it to make flyers work against the Tomb Kings. I definitely think that's a very solid option, but just because Tomb Kings don't have options to counteract or the flyers that effectively. So I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. I know it was a long one. I apologize for the lengthy intro. And I will definitely be trying to mitigate that in future videos as Tomb Kings become more of a mainline faction and everyone understands them more and more. But right now I'm just trying to introduce it and make sure everyone's aware of what each unit does or what each unit is. I do hope you guys enjoyed. As usual, guys, if you have any comments, criticism, anything like that, be sure to post them down in the comments. I'll respond as soon as I can. And I will see you all in the next one. Over and out.